and we didn't want to begin and introduce you without you getting to hear what we were saying about you. So good morning, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome and welcome back to those of you who've been with us this month. Today, we're beginning our final and concluding day of our Broadband conference, our annual Blandin Foundation Officer Broadband Development Broadband Conference, Connected We Stand. Thank you so much for joining us today. To those who are joining us for the first time, welcome and welcome back to our conference participants. I'm Bernadine Jocelyn. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Engagement at Blandin Foundation, based in Grand Rapids. Please go ahead and use the chat box here to share where you're checking in from this morning. And we'd love to see where folks are joining from today. And for those of you who have been participating with us in the conference this month, I'd like to invite you to please also share in the chat box a reflection of your experience during the conference. I don't know, maybe something you heard or learned that surprised you or inspired you or outraged you.
I got it.
Or...
I'm all set. I'm all set, Gwen.
Bye. Oh, great.
Hi.
Great.
Al.
Hi. Hey, Tom. We're just getting started
hey,
here.
Brother Al.
Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. Sorry, I was just getting my technology coordinated here.
Fantastic. We want to both see and hear you. And we're just, I'm Bernadine Jocelyn at Blandin Foundation. We're just getting started, Tom. I was just inviting everybody to drop something in the chat to let us know where they're from and to share a reflection about the conference. We've been meeting here over the month of October, and many of the people on today have been with us iteratively in many different meetings talking about why we all need broadband and how we're going to use it to make our communities more vibrant.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Blandin? You know, I read what you sent, but just love to hear who will exactly be on the call and what your main goal is.
Sure. Well, we're on the call now, Tom. Everybody's with us.
Okay, great, wonderful.
Part of her goal. Part of her goal is to discuss the format in front of everybody.
Gotcha. Perfect.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm just kind of setting the stage here for us, Tom. I was gonna give an overview of the day.
Great.
So we're getting started here, and we're gonna hear from you this morning. And Mark Ritchie is with us. He's gonna handle the discussion and Q&A afterwards. Senator Franken's here to introduce you. So after we'll spend about an hour with you, Tom, this morning, and then at 10:30, our real star of the day is going to speak. So everything's just a warm-up act for Ann Tracy at 10:30, who's going to report to us what's happened in broadband across the Minnesota's 87 counties in this last year. Now, Al, I've seen you draw the states. Can you draw the 87 counties?
No. Here's why. When you draw all 50 states from memory, which I can do, everyone's very impressed. Nobody knows the counties, so it doesn't matter. You could do anything.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, but everybody sees the map.
You could be making it up.
Everybody sees the map of the United States many times a day, so that's why I do that. And so, nope. Didn't learn that. I thought it said, well, I learn all the no.
Well, Senator Al Franken is a man who needs no introduction, especially to Minnesotans and Saturday Night Live fans. But I'm going to flex my privilege here as conference host to give him one anyway. So I didn't know for sure, you know, I was wondering, is Al Franken is he a native Minnesotan? Turns out Senator Franken was born in New York City, but moved to Albert Lea with his parents when he was 4, and later to St. Louis Park, which is where he met Tom Friedman. And I hope we'll maybe hear that story today about how they met. Senator Franken grew up in what he has called, I've seen him refer to it as the basic Minnesota values, which he's often summed up as fairness for the little guy. Senator Franken started out his comedy career, and I love that sentence. Our senator started his comedy career at Dudley Riggs' Brave New Workshop. I don't know how many of us on the call here ever got to go to Dudley Riggs, but I have a memory as a young teenager of having my mind opened at Dudley Riggs. He worked up an act there with his Blake High School classmate and friend Tom Davis. And from Blake, then Senator Frank went off to Harvard, where he earned a BA in political science. But I think he'd probably agree that the best thing about Harvard was that was where he met his future wife, Franny Bryson, at a freshman mixer with co-eds from Simmons College. And they got married in 1975, and then after Harvard moved to LA. And I guess the rest is history, kind of. Al Franken became one of the comedy writers for Saturday Night Live from its launch in 1975 to 1980, and again from 85 to 95. He was among the longest tenures, had among the longest tenures of any of the show's writers. Received 7 Emmy nominations and 3 awards for his television writing and producing, and he created characters like the self-help guru Stuart Smalley. In another one of his routines, he proclaimed the 1980s the Al Franken decade.
Yeah, Bernadine. I just think I don't want your introduction of me to be longer than my introduction of Tom.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the longer I speak, the my introduction, then you can embellish yours. Well, I'm almost.
No. I don't want to embellish mine. I want to introduce Tom.
All right. Well, you can introduce Tom. Let me just say one more thing, then, if I might. That as a senator, Al Franken was a very effective champion of rural Minnesota and broadband. He served on the Senate's Justice Committee, did a lot of work on cybersecurity and consumer privacy, and had our back in DC. So I guess with that, I just want to say that Senator, I want to thank you for your public service on behalf of Minnesota. I want to thank you for all you do to bring our focus back to Paul Wellstone's simple truth about we all do better when we all do better. I'm really delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bernadine. And I did not mean to interrupt you, but I did. Because I think we're here to talk about what you guys are doing. And also I'm here to introduce Tom, who it's very exciting to do that. And thank you for the great work that all of you do. And again, for inviting me. Tom, of course, also kind of needs no introduction, but I'll touch on a couple things. First of all, he is winner of 2 Pulitzers.
3.
Is it 3? Okay. Okay. Well, let's see. I didn't major in political science at Harvard.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, and it's the same. Okay. Anything I get wrong, just let it slide. Okay. And no, if I'm high, let it slide. If I'm low. Okay. Actually, he is okay. 1 national book award is that right? From Beirut to Jerusalem. It is just it's amazingly remarkable. He has won 23 writing awards, 2 of which were cufflinks. Okay, before I go any further, I just again want to thank all of you and for what Blandon does, the work you do to strengthen communities. It's really in the best spirit of our state and our country. And sometimes when you look at the news, you think, my God, things are so divided, things are so tribal. This is hopeless. And when you're doing that, it's very easy to overlook organizations like yours, because you're doing work every day to make our country stronger, and there are people of different political philosophies, different kinds of people working toward the same goal, and that is, in this case, right now, we're talking about bringing broadband to every community in Minnesota. One of the eye-opening lessons that I think a lot of Americans have is just how important broadband is during this pandemic. My grandchildren have been going to virtual school since February, and it's been rough on them. And at the same time, they're very lucky kids because their parents are home working, also on using broadband, also using computers, and they have a yard to play in, and they have enough food. But I've been doing this podcast, and that's not the case with every kid in the country, unfortunately. And everybody needs broadband. If Tom Friedman were to write a column about Blandon providing internet to a family in a small Minnesota community, he'd title it "Broadband: The New Rural Electrification." Am I right, Tom?
Yeah, I even did that.
Yeah, I didn't know you did that,
Yeah,
but I knew,
yeah.
but I knew you'd do that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You're right.
and then he would he'd call if he wrote a book, it would be Broadband: The New Rural Electrification, and then he'd spend the rest of the chapter working that metaphor like a sharecropper's mule. In doing his research, Tom would have found a family with 2 high school students who, until a month ago, had to drive the family's Dodge Caravan to the McDonald's where they could get hooked up to McDonald's Wi-Fi to do their homework. But that all stopped when the family got connected, thanks to the work of the Blandon Foundation, bringing broadband to their community. And at the end of the piece, Tom would have asked the teenager's mom if she knew how that she was wired because of Blandon, and the mom would be crying tears of gratitude for her broadband. And Tom would ask her, "Do you know the folks at the Blandon Foundation?" And that's a Pulitzer Prize-winning kind of question. And she would answer, "No, but the people at the Blandon Foundation know me." That's the FDR story you keep hearing so many times. Okay. I thought that was funny. Anyway, as a coda, Tom would point out that no country with a McDonald's has ever invaded another country with a McDonald's. I'm making fun of Tom now. I read Tom a lot, and it's easy to do. It's easy to make fun of him. And I can do that. I'm allowed to do that because we grew up in the same community, St. Louis Park, Minnesota. I think many of you know this, but when I was growing up, St. Louis Park was affectionately known as St. Jewish Park by the white nationalists who lived in St. Louis Park. That's not true. That's not true. I got one guy laughing, and it's your speaker. Tom and I grew up. When we grew up, we were little kids in post-World War II America. At that time, anyway, every American was extremely anti-Nazi after World War II. And if you were pro-Nazi, you just kept that to yourself. but evidently that's not the case anymore, at least for the militias in Michigan. Tom writes at some length about the hometown that we both grew up in. As I said, we're called St. Jewish Park. We're only 20% Jewish, but as all of you know, in Minnesota, any Jews is a lot of Jews. And in fact, that was our license plate until 1957. Okay. So growing up in Jewish in St. Louis Park, I experienced no anti-Semitism, none. And it was a wonderful, nurturing community to grow up in. And I, like I'm sure Tom did, felt like the luckiest kid in the world. Both of us, I think, were raised in Ramblers. Tom has two sisters, so they had a 3-bedroom Rambler. I had just one brother, so we had a 2-bedroom Rambler, and I believe we lived about a mile apart. And and when you write about bowling, it's Texatonka, right? Is that where you bowl?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's where I bowl too. I don't want to talk to Tom, but growing up then, you just felt like you could be anything you wanted to be, and I think that was because our parents and their friends and their generation tried to make it work that way. We still have a great public school system in St. Louis Park. It's impossible to overstate the importance of education to everyone in St. Louis Park. St. Louis Park voters have never voted down a school bonding issue, never. The demographics of our city have changed since we were kids, but the commitment to education and community is still the same year after year. St. Louis Park is considered one of the best, if not the best, school system in the state. But now, instead of a Tom Friedman growing up to be a multi-Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, 3, and a National Book Award recipient and the go-to expert on the Middle East, now instead of having a name like Cohen or Friedman or Franken, their last names are things like Abdullah, Abdullahi, Tao, Hernandez. But we are still the #1 school system in the state. So here's a guy who Tom, who drank from the same groundwater that I did, which was full of creosote. A creosote factory near us that leached into the groundwater. And that's why Tom and I, when we go see a Coen Brother movie, we don't drink an extra large Coke beforehand. Also might have something to do with us being in our 60s. So among other things, all these accomplishments, Tom is a great laugher. So I take it away, Tom.
Well, thank you, Al. This is really great. And Bernadine, thank you for inviting me and for inviting Al to introduce me. And as Paul Simon said when he did his concert in Central Park, it's great to do a neighborhood concert, you know, and it's great to be back with my friends from Minnesota. You know, let me just begin by maybe just, because I hope this is going to be a discussion, because I really want to learn from you all as well. So give you just some broad sort of framing remarks from 30,000 feet, and then something really micro from Minnesota, and then we'll just open up the floor. If you'll just excuse me for 1 second, I'm going to plug in my computer so I don't run out of juice while I'm talking. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so I'm gonna do a really broad sweep here, and then we'll end up in rural Minnesota. You know, the way I look at the world is that uh, I would argue there have been three great kind of promethean moments in the last 600 years. Prometheus being the Greek god who steals fire from a closet on Mount Olympus and gives it to human beings to create civilization. The first great Promethean moment was the printing press, and it played out its effects very slowly over 300 years. The second great Promethean moment was the Industrial Revolution, and it kind of played out in two phases over over a couple hundred years. First, through the invention of the steam engine, and then electrification and the internal combustion engine. And with each one of these Promethean moments came a whole set of political and social and economic adaptations as we learned how to get the best out of this moment and to cushion the worst, because all of them had this unleashing of energy of both these Promethean moments had both upsides and downsides. And basically, this second great Promethean moment, the Industrial Revolution, was a hugely destabilizing moment. It was a moment when capitalism met the Industrial Revolution. It was incredibly destabilizing as it blew us out of the feudal era. And we had two world wars. We had communism, fascism, socialism, and we eventually settled in the 20th century on the best way to manage this incredible release of energy, and we called it the welfare state. And the welfare state came in different versions. There was a very left version, China and Russia's version. There was a center left version, Western Europe's form of welfare state. And then there was the New Deal, which was America's form of the welfare state. And one way to look at politics is that then politics really all gathered around how do we get the most out of this welfare state and cushion the worst. And what politics became a debate about between left and right was how high should the walls be around your welfare state? How open should you be to trade and immigration? How thick should your floor be? That is, what should be the safety nets under everybody? And how solid was the ceiling? And the ceiling was a ceiling on the kind of pace of change. And left-right politics really became a debate about those three things. So the left thought we should have higher walls, thicker floors. The right said let's have thinner floors and lower walls, and have no ceiling on the pace of change, etc. And what has interested me of late is the fact that you may have noticed that every political party that grew up in around this sort of left-right grid of the Industrial Revolution has basically blown up in the last 5 or 6 years. The British Tory party went from being a kind of global pro-business party to a Brexit party. The Liberal Party in England disappeared, and Labour became Marxist. The Republicans have become a kind of cult of Trump party, and I promise you, I'm afraid the Democrats will blow up if and as soon as they get back into power. France is the only country in the world who has a leader with no party, and he has an opposition with no leader. I have no clue who governs Italy today, but I know they're not called Christian Democrats. So something's actually going on that is blowing up all of these political parties. And what's going on is that we've entered what I argue is our third great Promethean moment. Now, some people have called this the fourth industrial revolution. I don't call it that because there's actually nothing industrial about it. And it implies a continuum with the industrial revolution. And this moment is a discontinuum. So I believe we're entering our third great Promethean moment. It's blowing up the old binary systems of politics. And it's forcing us to reconsider how do we govern this energy release, this new energy release. And this new energy release, I argue, is three simultaneous accelerations all at the same time. in what I call the market, Mother Nature, and Moore's Law, or technology. If you put technology on a graph, it's accelerating like a hockey stick. Mother Nature is climate change. And the market for me is globalization. So it's really reshaping the world today is not the printing press. It's not the steam engine or electrification. The world's being reshaped today by the simultaneous acceleration in these three giant forces: technology, globalization, and climate and environmental degradation. So from 30,000 feet, that's actually what I think is happening. The way I describe it is that the world is getting really fast, really fused, through globalization and climate, really deep because technology now is going really, really deep, and also really open. With one of these things, everyone in the world now can be a publisher, a paparazzi, a filmmaker, and a reporter without an editor, libel lawyer, or filter. So our need and requirement to navigate and sort of shape our politics has to be in response to this world that's getting really fast in terms of technology change, really fused because of globalization, really deep because technology is going deep, and all the time really more open, noisier than ever, with so many more people able to participate in the debate. So as I've thought about that, another way to say it is that the world's getting really complex, really complex. Heck, when I grew up in St. Louis Park, everything was kind of binary. You were either a man or a woman. You were either white or black. You were either Jewish or Christian. You were your work was work is what you did Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, in a place called an office. And learning is what you did from age 5 to 21, and the rest of your life was working. I grew up in a whole set of binaries. Okay. Well, I can see some of you nodding because you know that all those binaries have been blown away now. Okay. Now you're white, black, brown, Asian. You're you're a male, female, LGBTQ, X. You're boy in St. Louis Park now, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Hmong, Protestant, atheist. The world's gotten, and by the way, education now is not first I learn and then I work, but it's actually work, learn, work, learn, work, learn, work, learn. My office is now my home. I just walk downstairs to my office. And when the pandemic is over, that's not going away. So all of these kind of binaries have broken down. And that's why the book I'm working on, I've tended to call it Quantum Politics. Quantum Politics. Why is that? Because basically what's happening in the world is mirroring what happened to computing. So we're on what we'd call classical computers. And this computer is built around a microchip. And a microchip basically is based on the ability to generate zeros and ones, zeros and ones, zeros and ones. It's like flipping a quarter. And if you could flip a quarter 1,000,000,000 times on a microchip, you could generate compute and storage. We're moving to a world of quantum computing. Quantum computing is like spinning a quarter. You can be in multiple states at the same time. Multiple states at the same time. Now keep that thought in your head, because what I'm going to argue to you now is to thrive today, you actually need to be in multiple states at the same time. I'll just give you one tiny example. You read about those knuckleheads in Hollywood who bribed those people to get their kids into USC. I actually wanted to call those people and say, excuse me, but if you're going to bribe somebody to get your kid into a school, could I suggest you bribe to get them into IBM's in-house university, or Infosys's in-house university, not USC? Because if I showed you IBM's in-house university today, you would say to me, Tom, how do I get my kid into that school? So IBM's in-house university is not based on just-in-case learning. We're going to teach you this just in case you might need it in one of your jobs in the next 30 years. It's all built on just-in-time learning. Just-in-time learning. Now you start to understand why we need rural broadband, okay? Because what is that all about? Well, in the old binary world, I government educated, you business employed. But what if the pace of change now is so fast that I government can't educate fast enough to keep up with the skills needs of business? Because in a fast world, the half-life of skills is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. I need just-in-time learning, not just-in-case learning. And so if I showed you IBM's and in-house and Infosys's in-house university today, you would say, Tom, who do I bribe to get my kid in there? And basically, I wrote about this a couple of weeks ago. What's going to happen to education is education's going to move to ecosystems, where basically the University of Minnesota will partner with 3M, will partner with the local community college, and they will create an ecosystem. And the students at the University of Minnesota will be able to take courses on 3M's in-house learning platform, which is all about just-in-time learning skills. And employees at 3M will be able to take philosophy and ethics courses at the University of Minnesota. And education is going to move to these gigantic ecosystems, because there's no way parents are going to go on spending $250,000 a year, over 4 years to get their kid educated with just-in-case learning. It's just not going to be sustainable. So that's just an example of what happens when the world gets fast, fused, and deep. You have to be in multiple states at the same time. Same thing goes on in regulation. You know, in the old system, I government regulated, you business innovated. But what if you business are innovating so fast and deep now, I don't even know where you are. Then I'm Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah asking Mark Zuckerberg at a Senate hearing, Mr. Zuckerberg, if you give your product away for free, how do you make money? How do you make money? So the regulator had no clue where the innovator even was. The regulator's got to be in multiple states at the same time now. So we're going to have to get regulation differently. So all of this, I'm still at 30,000 feet, is to say that we're basically going through a gigantic climate change, okay, in how we work, how we learn, how we live, how we transport, how we educate. We're going through a giant climate change. We're in the third great Promethean moment. And the one thing that is common to every answer for how to deal with this giant climate change is that it can only be governed, not in the old binary way, left, right. It can only be governed by ecosystems, what I call complex adaptive coalitions. Complex adaptive coalitions. Where did I come up with that? That's actually a term from the natural world. Which ecosystems in nature thrive when the climate changes? Those that have complex adaptive networks, where the different parts of the ecosystem all network together to maximize their resilience and propulsion. Well, my argument is in this third great Promethean moment, when the world's getting fast, fused, deep, and open, it is so complex now that it mirrors, there's only one thing in your life experience that it mirrors, and that's the natural world. So if you want to understand how to govern today's modern society, study nature. Study what Mother Nature does, because she has all the answers of how to manage a super complex system. And the way she does it is with complex adaptive coalitions. Okay, enough for 30,000 feet. Now let's go to Willmar, Minnesota. So a lot of what I'm telling you is part of my last book and part of my coming book. So as part of my last book, this all started in 2016 probably. My book was called Thank You for Being Late. I got a call one day from my lecture agent, and he said, you've been invited to give a book talk in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, for something called the Hourglass Foundation. I said, sure, put it on my schedule. Fine. I'll go sell books in Lancaster. Anyways, about a week before I went to Lancaster, I got a call from my lecture agent. He said, I forgot to tell you something. There's going to be an hour-long reception before your talk, and you have to attend. My lecture agent's name is Carlton. I said, Carlton, you're killing me. I've got to do an hour reception before I talk. He said, it's part of the deal. So I go to Lancaster. I meet with the Hourglass Foundation. And first of all, I pulled over their CEO and said, what's this hourglass thing? Like, where does that come from? He said, actually, it comes from the fact that the hour is late and we need to figure out how to adapt. And then I go to the reception and someone comes up to me and says, hi, I'm from the Lancaster Health Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Anti-Poverty Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Education Coalition. I'm from the Lancaster Lead Abatement Coalition. Well, after enough of these meetings, I start to realize that I'm in a pretty amazing place. This town, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, has built all these coalitions. So I gave my lecture, and before I left, I had already set the date for me to come back and do a deep dive on Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And it was, it's a part of my book, and it was just enormously interesting because Lancaster was a dying town in the early 90s. It was a one company town, and the company Armstrong Tile basically was pulling out, and the town was dying. No one would go downtown. It was a dying community. And in 2018, Lancaster was named one of the 10 coolest cities in America. And I told the story about how that happened. And I won't repeat it here, but it was basically because they built a complex adaptive coalition to manage and navigate the climate change. And today, Reading, York, Harrisburg, not very good. Lancaster, like a rocket. So I really got into then to studying to try to understand, why does one small town rise and another one could be right down the street fall? And that became a really interesting question for me. So I started visiting small towns. And then after my book came out, I got a visit in my office one day from a woman named Dana Mortensen, who is a wonderful Minnesotan who runs an NGO called World Savvy, an education NGO. And she asked to come see me in my Washington office, and she came by, and anyone from Minnesota is always welcome. And we sat down and we started talking, and she said, and telling me what they were doing. And she happened to mention that she was working in Willmar, Minnesota. And I said, I happen to be an expert on Willmar, Minnesota, because I visited Willmar for 50 years growing up because I had an aunt and uncle there. And I said, I've always got working on small towns, and I kind of lost track of Willmar because my aunt and uncle passed away about 10 years ago. And I said, if you will set up a tour to Willmar for me, I will give your organization a free lecture. And she said, deal. So this was now a little over a year ago last May. I came back to Minneapolis, and we got into Dana's SUV, and it was me and Hamza Warfa she brought along. Hamza runs workforce development for Governor Walz. He's sort of the leading Somali in the state of Minnesota government, and she wanted me to meet Hamza. And I brought along an Israeli friend of mine named Giddy Greenstein, who is an expert on small towns in Israel. And he actually had come with me to Lancaster because he was very interested in comparing small towns in Israel that are thriving with small towns in Minnesota. So I called him up. I said, Giddy, have you ever been to West Central Minnesota? And he said, no. I said, well, we're going to West Central Minnesota. So there in that minivan, we were like the answer to a joke, so a Minnesotan, two Minnesotans, a Somali and Israeli, show up in a bar in Willmar. And the four of us, went out there. And before we went, on the way up, I told them a story I never forgot. So the story of my aunt and uncle, the reason I got interested in Willmar is that my aunt and uncle, my dad's sister and brother-in-law, Hy and Bev Rosenbaum, moved to Willmar in 1949, 4 years before I was born. They came back from the war and they decided to strike out, and they started a little steel company in Willmar called Hy Steel. And when they moved to Willmar, Willmar was 99.999% white Protestant, Catholic, Scandinavian, and German, and 3 Jewish families who were the diversity in the town. And I visited Willmar for 50 years, every winter and summer, to see my aunt and uncle and go fishing on Lake Andrew. So I knew Willmar a lot, and Willmar knew me because anytime I accomplished anything in the world, my aunt would insist that the local Willmar newspaper write up what Hy and Bev Rosenbaum's nephew had done. Okay, so and they had a lot of friends in Willmar who became friends of ours. Anyways, I never forgot. Around 1975, my aunt came down to the Twin Cities for a family event, and she pulled me aside and said, "Tom, I was in the grocery store on Saturday, and I heard someone speaking Spanish. Spanish. I heard someone speaking Spanish." And for her, it was her first encounter with the other. And she never forgot it. And I never forgot it. And that was why I was sort of curious. They said they'd passed away, my aunt and uncle, about 10 years ago. What had happened to Willmar? So we drive into Willmar. Our first stop is Willmar High School. And the principal meets us. Amazing principal they have there, Willmar High. He brings us into the lobby, and he shows us a giant steel world map that hangs over the lobby. It's got all these pegs in it. And he explains that the rising seniors every year at Willmar High take a ladder out, and they put pins or pegs into the map of where all the kids from Willmar High senior class are from. Because Willmar today is almost 50% Latino and Somali. A town that in the 1950s and 60s was anything but. And where in 1975, my aunt thought the Martians had landed when she heard someone speaking Spanish in the grocery store. And that steel map was donated by the people who bought my aunt and uncle's steel company, now called West Central Steel. So what goes around comes around. Now, Willmar had its challenges absorbing all of these people. As I wrote a whole story about it. Somebody threw a pig's foot at a Somali woman. There were real growing pains. But Willmar today is really thriving. And I don't have to tell you all, but St. Cloud down the road has not been thriving. So why is it that one town thrives and one town just 40 miles away didn't thrive? That to me is one of the most interesting questions in political science today. And here is how come Willmar, with all its growing pains, and they'll tell you it's not perfect at all, but relatively has made an amazing transition when you consider the demographic change. What did Willmar understand? Well, the first thing Willmar understood or had going for it is it understood that necessity is not only the mother of invention, necessity is the mother of inclusion. Because what happened in Willmar is, like so many small towns in Minnesota, the young people were leaving and they could not get employees. Nobody could get enough workers. If you could fog up a mirror back then, you could get a job in Willmar, Minnesota. If you were, I'm talking about at the Genio turkey plant or as an ag scientist, they needed everything, okay? And when you need employment, you don't care whether someone is man or woman, white, black, brown. You don't care who they sleep with or what God they pray to. All you care is about their social skills. Will you wake up, clean up, dress up, sit up, learn up, and shut up? And if you will, you have a job in Willmar, Minnesota today. So that necessity, the necessity really busted through a lot of, really understandable in some ways, resistance to people who were so different, coming into their community. That necessity just busted through. And that's really how it began. So necessity was the mother of inclusion. And small towns in Minnesota that cannot handle inclusion are all going to die because there's just not going to be the employment base there. So the first thing you have to have is you've got to be able to handle inclusion. The reason Willmar could handle inclusion, and this was true in Lancaster as well, is that it was blessed with a high concentration of what I call leaders without authority. Leaders without authority are the most important leaders in any community. You know who the leaders with authority are. They're the mayor and the council people. It's the leaders without authority who set the tone for a community. So in the first Ramadan, when the Somalis in Willmar, they had nowhere to pray in Ramadan. And the fire chief said, I'm going to give you, there was no mosque in Willmar. Fire chief said, I'm going to give you the fire station. Oh, a lot of people in town didn't like that. Didn't like that. He said, too bad. These are our new neighbors. Leader without authority. They set the tone for everybody else. In Lancaster, the what do you call it? The uh, Hourglass Association, which is a whole collection of the town's leaders without authority. They meet every Friday morning at 7 a.m. around Artman's breakfast table. None of them are elected, but they set the tone for the whole town. And the elected officials really pay attention to them because these are people who basically come from the community, have deep roots in the community, and say, you know what? Not going to happen in my town. I'm not going to let my town go under. My grandparents lived here. My parents lived here. I love this place. Not going to let my town go under. That's where the leaders without authority come from. They formed the Hourglass Foundation in Lancaster, and they formed the equivalent in Willmar. Now, the third thing that happened in Willmar, exactly as happened in Lancaster, is that the leaders without authority all formed what I call a complex adaptive coalition. And a complex adaptive coalition is when the business community partners with the education community, partners with the philanthropic community, partners with the social entrepreneur community, partners with the local government, and they all move forward together as a coalition based on the greater interests of the community. And the first rule of these coalitions, I can tell you from Lancaster, when you show up at Art Mann's house at 7 a.m., they'll tell you whether you are a new time or a 100-time visitor, you see that hook on the door that you pass by? Hang your politics on that hook before you come into this room. Because our politics is called what works. So hang your politics outside before you come inside this complex adaptive coalition. And then the last thing Willmar had was it had far-sighted business leaders who were ready to invest in this complex adaptive coalition. Now, in Willmar's case, it was Blue Cross Blue Shield. What Blue Cross Blue Shield did was organize a series of community dinners in Willmar where anyone could volunteer to host a community dinner. And you signed up to go to someone's house. Fire chief did one, the mayor did one, different people did one. And anyone could sign up for anyone's dinner. And they talked about what does the community need? And then they had a giant community-wide meeting, and they voted on what are the, I think it was 12 or 19, I don't remember, projects we most all can agree the community needs. So one was a daycare center for elderly and infants basically together. One was a program to teach Somali women how to recognize autism, which they didn't fully understand. So they agreed on a dozen of these things. And Blue Cross Blue Shield actually spent 2 years in a row, they may have done it again this year, I don't know, but I was only on the 2 years, $245,000 a year, 2 years in a row to fund these community inspired and energized projects. So I called Blue Cross and I said, hey, why did you do that? Like, that's pretty cool, but why did you do that? And they said, oh, Tom, it's very simple. Healthy communities have healthy people. And healthy communities have healthy people, so our healthcare costs go down. It's one of the best investments we could possibly make. So that's basically the story of Willmar in a nutshell. And the story of Willmar in a nutshell is the story of Lancaster in a nutshell. It's a story of Red Wing in a nutshell, frankly. All of them have different variations on this. I was in the middle of basically writing up Red Wing when the pandemic hit, because I'd gone there next to try to understand why their community was doing so well. And so that's, to close where I began, that's what I call quantum politics. You have to be in multiple states at the same time. The old binary left-right thing, that doesn't work anymore, okay? If you look around the world today, some of the most effective governments, New Zealand, Germany, what do they have today? Germany has 3 states that are governed by what they call black-green coalitions. These are coalitions, like in New Zealand, where you have a right or left-wing government, right-wingers and Greens all together in the same government. They call them black and green. I just call them quantum governments. People are in multiple states at the same time. And if you ask me who is the most effective leader on the world stage today, I would tell you it's a woman named Angela Merkel. And you know what Angela Merkel got her PhD in? Quantum chemistry. I don't think that's an accident. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Tom, and thank you for taking us from 30,000 down to Willmar, which I would go there every year for International Day, and there was always a table from Papua New Guinea. I mean,
yeah,
yes. There's big diasporas and there's little diasporas, but you give us some hopeful signs. A place like Lancaster, which has a Lancaster farmer that's that thick that comes out every week. But you also gave us kind of a charge about our thinking process, needing to think into an optimistic future because we can imagine this change that you implied. It's not just that our hearts hope for a better future,
right.
Things are happening, but you make the point that whether it was the Hourglass or the folks in Willmar or wherever, this has to be an organized kindness, an organized complexity. It's an organized process. And I think this is something that sort of Minnesota has, kind of specialized in, the Midwest region. The first question that's listed on here was the question about scaling. And in this case, this question was about to the rest of Minnesota. Now, you took us from way up down deep. Can you help with some insights about scaling, bigger, more regional, more impact, more multiplier forces for saving the planet and ourselves?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to offend anybody, but if you're reading my column, you know who I want to win the election. So, and the reason I want Biden to win is because I hope, and I actually think, and I certainly have been urging him, that if he wins, to form a national unity government. We need a national unity government. And I hope he will name several moderate Republicans to his cabinet. I'd love to see him make Mitt Romney Secretary of Commerce. I'd love to, see him bring other, Christy Todd Whitman and other moderate Republicans. We need a national unity government. If we just keep going for what we've been doing, Democrats come in and undo everything Republicans did. Republicans come in, undo everything Democrats did. We're not going to get anywhere. You know what I mean? So that is my hope, Mark, at the national level. That we can only, we need to do big hard things, and big hard things can only be done together. Big hard things can only be done together. You can do small things alone. You can break things alone. But if you want to actually make big progress, only big progress can be made when people go together. And it's a cliche, but if you want to go, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And it really, really is true. So that's what I'd like to see at the national level. At the state and local level, I'm that's a little out of my skill set. All I know is these communities that have done it and why they've done it. And the reason I've written about it is precisely to inspire people like yourselves to know, hey, what are the models that are working out there? Minneapolis had Itasca, which was its version of a complex adaptive coalition, the Itasca project. What happened there is a complicated, obviously, story, what happened in the Twin Cities. We have gone through, the reason I call my last book, Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations, is that we've just gone through a period of rapid change, the likes of which is really unprecedented in recent history, because, and this is, I believe, where Trump came from, because a lot of people woke up one day and went into, like my aunt went into the supermarket in Willmar, and the woman at the cash register, she wasn't wearing a baseball cap. Okay. And then her husband went into the men's room, and there was a woman next to him, and she seemed to have a penis. Then they went to the office, and their boss had just rolled up a robot next to their desk, and it seemed to be studying their job. And all this happened at the same time. My sense of home, my sense of social norms, my sense of work all got completely disrupted at the same time. Now, don't get me wrong, I embrace and love, all of this change and diversity, but it happened too fast for some people. And so along came a guy named Trump and said, I can stop the wind. I can stop the wind. And that's why his metaphor of a wall was so brilliant, because the wall was not just for Mexico. The wall was, I can stop the wind, everything that's making you uncomfortable. And so to me, the response to Trump is to build complex adaptive coalitions that can manage this change. And so I reject both the far left and the far right, one that wants to do nothing and the other that wants to disband the police. That's not going to get anything done. Okay. We need to find a way to move together, and only with these complex adaptive coalitions, because we are going through a climate change, but multiple climate changes. We're going from a white majority country to a minority majority country. We're going through it at a time of incredible climate change in the climate. We're going through it at a time of incredible climate change in the world of work. And so that's a lot of climate changes at once. And to do that, you need to find a way to bring people together, and they move together. And the small towns that are thriving are the ones who have done that. To me, and that's what distinguishes them. And that's why if I were running for president, I'd be running as a progressive localist. How do I push more authority down to the highest trust level? So my teacher, Dov Seidman, likes to say, trust is the only legal performance enhancing drug. Trust is the only legal performance enhancing drug. Where there is trust in the room, oh my God, you can go so fast, you can jump so high, you can go so far. Where there's no trust in the room, you're St. Cloud, baby, or you're Syria. Okay, you're just trying to jump off the Syrian desert floor. You can't jump very high off the Syrian desert floor. So it's all about pushing politics and decision making down to the highest trust level. And what I'm about in my journalism is how do you create understanding and trust so people can move together.
Thank you for that. Last night, Susan Eisenhower spoke to a webinar to
Yeah.
Minnesota group, and she talked about the time when President Eisenhower appointed Democrats to the Supreme Court because he wanted this kind of balance.
Yes.
The next question asks the question, getting back to the national, where are our companies, our corporations in thinking in this way that you're describing, a kind of unity or unified perspective, a balanced perspective?
It's so you have corporations who get it, I would say. Companies like Blue Cross, I really take my hat off to them, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And a lot of companies are really on a journey right now to getting it. I would say the best ones for sure. And then you have others that don't. And it's really finding your partners among those who understand that it's in their economic benefit, in the benefit of their employees and the communities they work in and draw workers from, to be good partners, to be part of these coalitions. And the companies that do that, I think, are the ones that are going to do well and are doing well, and the ones that don't, I think, won't do well.
So we had a book club. We read. Thank you for being late, and we had an incredible crowd. This was about a week ago. But one of the points that came out was that you thank your guest who's late for giving you the opportunity, the gift of a pause.
Right.
And it's noted that this moment right now has been called by some the great pause. I mean, it's
Yes.
Everybody's experiencing this different, but at least for some, is there an element of your appreciation that led to that story being included right at the very beginning of your
Yeah.
book? And that, is there an element of the current moment that has that pause that needs to be said and then harvested or taken advantage of, that you see that matches that feeling you had when you wrote the book?
It's a wonderful question, Mark. And so I am famously, I have never looked at Facebook. I do not know what it looks like. I have a Facebook page defensively because people were doing phony Facebook pages from me. I've never looked at Twitter, but I have 915,000 Twitter followers because I use Twitter as a broadcast platform for my column. So I'm very happy to use it as a broadcast to get my column out there, But the world is too noisy for me, and I can't think and concentrate if I'm always looking at Facebook. If a bell is always going off from Twitter or whatever, it's just too noisy for me. And you know what? I may miss some things. I may find out about the coup d'etat 5 minutes later from CNN and not from Twitter, or the hurricane or the tornado. What? I think I'll live with that. 5 minutes, that's okay. If I have 5 more minutes of time to think and reflect, I just need quiet in my head in order to think. And it's just harder and harder for people to find that quiet when you're always looking over your shoulder about what's being said about you. And I tell everyone, Lord knows I have my critics. And I tell everybody, if you're tweeting about me, you all have a good time, because I'm not reading it. I'm on to my next book. Catch me if you can. So many people are leaking oil every day by engaging in these social networks, and they have their upside. I know. I mean, it's a great broadcast mechanism for me. But I think they're one of the worst things that ever happened to the planet, frankly, because what they've destroyed is any common sense of truth and I think trust. And without truth and trust, you can't do anything. Unless we can agree on what's true, then we can't decide which path to go down. Unless we trust each other, we can't go down that path. And so what I think social networks are doing, and a few politicians helping along the way, is destroying truth and trust. And that's where our democracy is in such crisis.
You used your broadcast voice, your mechanisms, and talked about the Northside Achievement Zone, which
Yes.
is a very special organization. And just for full disclosure, my wife just retired from there, and that's
Yes.
all. But you use certain language and certain descriptors this morning, this day, talking about Willmar and other places. That's had resonance with the way you describe some parts of NAZ, Northside
Right.
Achievement Zone.
Absolutely. Wasanda's a very close
This
friend, yeah.
implies that there's some similarities that are rural urban. Maybe we don't talk about those similarities enough. Maybe this business of how divided we are, urban, city, rural, et cetera. Could you talk about what you saw at NAZ, how that resonates with what you saw in rural settings or smaller town settings, and how we might build on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Mark. I happened to be talking to Sandra Samuels, who runs NAS, just this morning before I got on this call. So
There you go.
so
Okay.
Sandra's a very good friend of mine, and she's built a complex adaptive coalition. I mean, she
Yes.
basically says that the solution for the North Side, is one that's got to involve business and educators and families and social service agencies and local government. And we've got to find a way to all work together. And NAS is a giant complex adaptive coalition to elevate the North Side. And by the way, it's hard work. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Um, I mean, I'm so pained by what happened to Minneapolis, and that my hometown is now a ghost town. It's unthinkable to me, that has happened. All that's missing is the tumbleweed, and that tells you something very deep has broken down in the community. And I don't know. And my greatest frustration in not being able to travel right now is not because I can't go to the Middle East. It's because I can't go to the Middle West.
Right.
And I can't go to Minneapolis and do a deep dive and understand what happened here. Because I'd written about Itasca and they seem to be on the right track. And then this volcano erupted and the lava has engulfed so much, and getting the lava back inside the volcano is going to be a real challenge. And to do it in the age of social networks, when all these political leaders are being assaulted every day on Twitter and Facebook and whatnot, um, it takes a very tough-minded person to do that. But that's it's really a challenge. Um, I saw Ann Tracy put up a very good question. Would we know about George Floyd without social networks? Absolutely true. I mean, there's no question that social networks. I'm being very selfish because I have a column in the New York Times, so I don't need social networks. But to your question, Ann, but absolutely, there's a huge upside to them, but there's a huge downside as well. And lately I've been focused more on the downside, but absolutely we wouldn't have anywhere near the transparency. But I would say something else about social networks, that when all you see from an incident, any incident, is 15 seconds of video, and you don't see what happened before, what happened after, um, that dopamine, that can go right into your head in a way that really can enrage you, which is what social networks are designed to do, in ways that also make solving the problem that much more difficult. And I personally wouldn't even begin to suggest that there's some context that explained why those policemen did what they did to George Floyd. You could have watched that 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after, and it would have been the same result. But that's not always the case. And sometimes when you're assaulted all day by short video clips of this or that incident, um, and it's done by a social network company whose business model is to keep you engaged and enraged so they can sell you more ads, that also has an unhealthy downside as well. So it's really about finding the best of social networks and culling out the worst, like everything else. So, but it's a good question, Ann.
Tom, you've made I would say, a kind of meta contribution to political thought and political dialogue, and I believe political process, by showing that the analysis of the micro of the community of the neighborhood can reveal stories, reveal connections, dot connections and others that then can help put some logic to
Right.
bigger forces. And then we could begin to see, how can we apply this? So this would be something that would potentially be enabling and encouraging, inspiring to every single person, because everybody can be an expert about their home,
Sure.
their
Yeah,
neighborhood.
exactly.
Do you see the political process adapting to trying to learn from the local and then apply the thinking global. We always, think global, act
Right,
local.
yeah, right.
Now is with, do we know
I'm
local?
kind of reversing that. Yeah.
Yeah. I believe successfully, but I want to hear your view about, you're watching it from your angle.
Really good question, Mark, and not to be self-referential, but there aren't a lot of columnists coming to Willmar to try to understand the world.
Right.
So that's a very, or to Lancaster, I mean, what I've learned is that one of the secrets of my sauce is I'd like to hang out with people who fly close to the sun. So one of the my book, Thank You for Being Late, actually began at Walmart because I wanted to understand how Walmart's mobile app worked on my cell phone and how it could compete with Amazon. And so who's flying closest to the sun in retail? It's Walmart and Amazon. So my book actually came about because Walmart asked me to be the speaker for their famous Saturday morning meeting in Bentonville. They have this once a month. It's like the Ed Sullivan Show. It's amazing. I was the warm-up act for Kevin Costner in Bentonville. And I told him I would do it, but only if I was paid. And I wanted to be paid a lot. But I'm not allowed to take money from companies. So I said, here's how I want to be paid. I want you to get your IT team together and show me what happens if I try to buy, we settled on a 30-inch Panasonic television off Walmart's mobile app on my cell phone.
How retrograde is that?
Exactly. And what happened was the stuff I learned in that meeting actually opened up a whole universe to me. Because if you go to places like Walmart that's competing every day with Amazon, or AT&T that's competing every day with Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile, these guys are flying close to the sun. So I go to these companies and I say, hey, I'm not actually interested in your stock price, not interested in who your new CEO is, not interested in your quarterly earnings. I just want to talk to two people. I want to talk to your head of human resources, and I want to talk to the head of your research lab. So I want to know how you're training your people to be ready for this world. And I want to know where the tip of your spear is. What's the technology that's coming? Because whatever's happening here, sooner or later, is going to come to a Willmar near you. Okay. And so I learn by going to the edge of the story. And I'm unique in this as a journalist. I mean, I discovered that companies, are fonts of just insight. Forget profits and losses, because the companies that are, the best way to, they say the best way to understand the future is to invent it. But the second best way to understand the future is to hang around with people who are inventing it. And that's basically what I do. And so Willmar also is a tip of a spear. It's on the edge, these small towns that can't print money, they can't run big deficits. They got to figure out how to make this work, or they're a ghost town, And so I really like to put myself on the frontier, at the edge of the story. And that's how I learn. And then I come back like an explorer, Dr. Livingston in Africa. And I say, wow, I was just at the edge of the frontier. I was in Willmar, Minnesota. Let me tell you what I'd learned. And I'm actually not I always tell people it's really dangerous to disagree with me. And they say, oh my God, you are the most arrogant prick I've ever met. I say, no, you don't understand. It's not because it's because I'm actually not very smart. It's the real truth. I think I got 580 on my SATs in math and maybe, 600 or something in English. So because I'm not very smart, I have to be a really good reporter. And I am a really good reporter. And so I build everything I do. Everything I've told you about Willmar didn't come from a philosophy book. It came from going to Willmar. And then what I am really good at is connecting the bricks. So I take a brick here and a brick here and a brick here and a brick here, and suddenly I'm from Willmar. And then I'm talking to you about Angela Merkel and why her outlook on the world actually reflects what's going on in Willmar. So I'm really good at dot connecting and bricklaying. I'm a bricklayer, and I build everything. All my books are just bricks upon bricks upon bricks. So you better have done the same thing. Because you're going to bullshit with me on philosophy, that's going to become very apparent. I once did a dialogue. He's a very smart guy, but Yuval Noah Harari, you may have read his books. He's done these big, giant books on civilization and great trends. And we did a dialogue in London last year for Intelligence Squared, or maybe it's 2 years ago now. And he was making these broad, generalizations, and he's very smart, original thinker. I don't want to in any way take away from it. But there were just a couple of times where I just said, yeah, but actually, here's what's going on at AT&T, which actually that isn't, so he's doing it from 30,000 feet down. And by the way, there's a real importance for that. And I do it from ground level up, basically. And
Right.
so that's how I learned.
Well, I think you might warn that person that you're also a very deep and open-hearted listener.
Yes.
And
well,
so this is what gives you the raw material. But I want to add one other attribute.
I'll just say one thing about that,
Yeah.
Mark, because it's apropos for this process you're going through, is that young journalists often come to me and say, I want to do what you do. What do I need to know? And I said, well, you need to know, first of all, how to type fast. I can type really fast. Okay. I actually went to night secretarial school in London to learn how to type fast. I type very fast. And you need to know some history and economics and philosophy and all that kind of stuff. But there's two things I think you need to be a successful journalist. One is you have to like people. Because when you like people, they like you back. And by like you back, I mean, they open up to you, and they tell you their crazy things that they're thinking, hoping, aspiring to. They tell you, Tom, I heard someone speaking Spanish in the grocery store, when people like you. But the second thing you need, and this is more important even than the first, is that you have to be a good listener. And it's for two reasons. And the second is more important than the first. The first is what you learn when you listen. You learn a lot when you listen. But the second is what you say when you listen. Because listening is a sign of respect.
Mhm.
And it's amazing what people will let you say to them if they think you respect them. And if they don't think you respect them, you can't tell them the sun is shining. If they do think you respect them, it's amazing what they'll let you say. So I am a little Jewish kid from St. Louis Park. I'm going to say one immodest thing. I'm probably one of, if not the most widely read columnist in the Arab Muslim world. That is not a natural thing. Okay. That this kid from St. Louis Park has this huge readership in the Arab world. And if you know my stuff, it's not because I'm out there saying, you're all great, you're all wonderful, it's all the Israelis' fault. It's because they know I'm actually a good listener and I respect them. In fact, I respect them so much, I have huge expectations of them. I'm not there to put them down. I'm actually there to try to push them and amplify them, but I won't take any of their bullshit. And they know that too. And so at the end of the day, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia, when he wanted to issue a peace plan, he didn't give it to one of his trained SEALs. He gave it to me because he knew if I said it was legitimate, people would think it was legitimate. And that all starts with being a good listener. And people think that you respect them, but respecting them is not agreeing with them. Respecting them starts with listening, agreeing with what you agree with, and honestly coming back to what you disagree with, but doing it in a way that you always convey that you want them to succeed. You're not there to put them down. You're not there to mock them and make fun of them. Something our president could learn.
Well, somebody just nominated you for Secretary of State
thank you.
right there in the
Appreciate
chat
it.
room. And I want to say something about that.
I
When
get my aggravation playing golf, but thank you.
The Secretary of State was hosting me going through Washington to speak to all the ambassadors about Minnesota's Expo bid. Who did he really want to come speak and to wow them? It was Tom Friedman. And Tom blew their minds. They all read you, so they loved hearing these stories. But then I took over a pile of these books. Thank you for being late. You signed them, took time. This was complicated to make that work. And I gave them to all of the people who came from around the planet to investigate if Minnesota was a good place to do a World's Fair. And the thing that they talked about the entire trip was that I had placed that book with your very, very beautiful handwritten note on their pillows when they arrived at the Mall of America Blue. And that's what they talked about. So there's a generosity to your spirit that makes people connect, but there's an authenticity and a kind of hope for tomorrow because somebody, Jewish kid from St. Louis Park from Minnesota, has put his finger on a human quality that is reproducible in Lebanon, in Iraq, wherever. and he's got the opportunity. He's worked hard enough that people read it now. And so in our last couple minutes, this is an opportunity for us to hear what inspires you, that helps you get up that next day and go, because you've been going nonstop
Yeah.
for a long time.
Well, it's a really, really good question, Mark, and I will confess, in these days before the election, um, again, I don't want to get too political, but you know where I'm coming from, that if Trump is reelected, I'm not sure I can go on doing what I'm doing as a columnist anymore, because what's the point? I mean, really. Um, and uh, and I've just got to sort all that out. Because I am a glass half full person. I mean, I'm the most optimistic person in the world still, and it all starts with having grown up in a community that worked. And so, um, uh, my if I were to write an autobiography, it's so obvious what the title would be. Always looking for Minnesota. I'm always looking to recreate St. Louis Park, you know, this community that worked outside of a Minneapolis that worked, inside of a Minnesota that worked. Now, there's no question that that Minnesota nice disguised no small amount of racism, no small amount of discrimination. It was a great place to go up if you're a white guy, you know, not if you were a black person who couldn't get out of the north side, not if you were LGBTQ and had to stay in the closet. But the 50s and 60s were great if you were a white guy, okay? Because also my teachers, my high school teachers, who I'm still in touch with, that one of them just wrote me last night, my English teacher, about my last column. Um, I benefited from all these amazingly talented women who today would be, lawyers and investment bankers and whatnot. But back then, all this talent, got funneled into school teachers. And these are the people who had the biggest influence on my life. Mim Cagle and Hattie Steinberg, my journalism teacher, still the only journalism course I've ever taken. Okay. So I grew up in the golden era of white guys. But I can't sort of leach out of me the fact that it made me feel like anything was possible. And so I try to still convey that. And I grew up in a wonderful community, and where there was prejudice and there was fears and suspicions, and they got broken down. And as Al said, to this day, St. Louis Park has never turned down a school bond issue. So it was a wonderful culture. Even though the demographics have radically changed. But I will have to find a different place for my optimism if we have 4 more years of this. It's just I've just really got to. I
But Tom,
personally can't handle that. So
it sounds like you also grew up in a town and a community and extended family of love,
yeah.
because it made you who you are, and your appreciation of it just shines through. And that can keep us and carry us many, many distances, many, many years, over many big obstacles, if we hang on to that love. And you give us a little shot of that with your columns, but also with your generosity of coming and being with us today and other places. And I'm going to turning this back to
just to say
my
one thing
colleague.
about that, Mark. I was talking to Sandra Samuels the other day, and we were talking about the challenges of the North Side now, and the number of shootings, and she said something I'd never heard before, but since I've heard it several times, that hurt people hurt people, hurt people hurt people. And that's not to say other things aren't, and not to excuse anything, but I have spent 67 and a half years never waking up and never wondering whether I was loved. And so I can't imagine people who from womb to whatever age never know if they've been loved and never had any kind of nurturing community or family around them. And so that's why so much of this is just basic meat and potatoes: community, good teachers, strong families. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. How we get there, with what we've got, is the big challenge. But where we need to go is not. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure that out.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Mark. And Tom, I hope you're feeling the love back at you from all
Oh.
of us here in Minnesota.
Absolutely.
So
Glad we could do
appreciate your
this.
sharing your reflections with us this morning.
It's really a pleasure. I'm going to sign off
And
now,
thanks.
but yeah, but thanks Al for doing this. But it was great, Brent. I'm so glad we were able to do this.
You are so generous. Thank you so much, Tom.
Right, you
We'll
take care.
be reading and following you and feel your love. Yep.
Thanks so much. Really
Okay.
appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And thanks also to Mark Ritchie. Didn't he do a terrific job visiting with Tom Friedman? Thanks everybody for that. I'm so delighted that that worked out. And we've got another hour or so here together. And I wasn't really joking when I said this morning that Tom Friedman was the warm-up act for Ann Tracy, because Tom, we're going to dive down from the 30,000 view from Beirut and Syria to Minnesota's 87 counties. Ann has spent the summer visiting rural communities and talking to them about the impact of broadband access and broadband access or lack thereof on their response to COVID, and has agreed to share some of her learnings with us today. Thank you so much, Ann. We look forward to learning from you.
Thank you. Mostly I want to talk about Tom Friedman, but I'll hold off, and I'm sure we'll get an opportunity later. This has been a fantastic month. One of the things I learned that I am going to laugh at myself for doing, the first week we had Kairos Alive, and they really imparted the importance of a little movement into a Zoom. I'm not going to sing, I'll do you all that favor, but just invite everybody to do a little stretch, a little breath. We just got a lot of great information from Tom Friedman, and for that we are thankful. And then we'll dive into the broadband profiles of all 87 Minnesota counties. So I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm sure it will take me a minute. There you go. And I know that we can see the preview, but that'll help keep me on track and honest. So if folks are okay with that, I'll just get started. I think this is the 4th or 5th year that I've done the Minnesota County profiles, which really means taking a look at the things that I've included on this list for each of the 87 counties. I usually pick kind of a weekend. I unplug my television and I just write them. I use a lot of information from the Office of Broadband Development. They do fantastic statistics and maps, and then you can see the other information too. A lot of what I do is track the narrative, what's happening in that county, based primarily off the Blanded on Broadband blog, which I tend to update. It gets updated. It used to get updated about 60 or 70 times a month. Post-COVID, it's over 100. So it's a good way to track it. I've also last year started to kind of give qualifiers, red, yellow, green. I don't want to say grades, but red, yellow, green. What that really reflects is how much I think these folks are going to get to the 2026 Minnesota state speed goals of 100 megabits per second down and 20 up. If you get a red, that is that you need to start paying attention. You know, you're falling way behind. You're falling way behind. If you get yellow, and I remember as a kid learning to drive, and I said, yellow means hurry up, right? That's what it means here. You know, if you get a yellow rank, if your county gets a yellow ranking, it's time to hurry up, to start paying attention to it. If you're green, and there are very few green, that means it seems like you're on track. So nice job. So I'll go into greater detail first in a second. First, I'm going to take a little look a little higher up. Kind of create these for community leaders, for policymakers as well. So I think especially for policy leaders, it's helpful to take a look at kind of the higher level look, not the national look that Tom Friedman's looking at, but at least the 5,000 foot of Minnesota. So here are the historical stats for access to broadband in Minnesota. The gray is gig access, so there's something to be aiming for. The orange is access to 120, which again is the 2026 speed goals in Minnesota. And blue is the access to the 25.3, which is the speed goals for Minnesota for 2022. For lots of reasons, I've really focused on 100 by 20. What I've learned in the past is that doing well on access to 25.3 does not guarantee that you're in line for that 120. And I'll look at that later. It's a little bit like it could be a trajectory in the right direction, or it could be like, I want to play music and I just bought an 8-track. Some communities are buying the 8-track version to get to that 25.3. But some important things at the high level. The first state speed goals were set in 2010. The speed goals back then, and here I think I've taken this from a task force, Minnesota Broadband Task Force annual report. But the speed goals were from 10 to 20 megabits per second down and 5 to 10 megabits per second up. I remember a lot of those discussions, and the hope was that counties would get to that by 2015. Well, in 2016, we instituted new goals, and that was that 25.3, which is the federal definition of broadband, and then that goal of 120 by 2026. Those new speed goals came in at about, can you guys see the mouse when I do this? Thank you, Mary. The speed goals were changed in 2026. It usually takes a year to a year and a half to see the impact of everything and any change like a speed goal. Once they changed the speed goals, then there was a change made to the border grants. Well, it takes a while for those to be awarded. And then once they're awarded, it takes a while for them to be deployed. So I'd say we'd see the impact of something like this, a year or a year and a half after that. Well, here's 2016, 2017, we can kind of see a leap. The other thing that happened in 2016, to be fair, is that I think they got $35 million, which is for the grant funding, which is more than they normally would get. But without a doubt, you can see the increase in the 120 and the 25 by 3 access. So that's one thing I think that's worth noting. Changing the speed goals seems to have made a difference. Another important factor is that in 2018, there was no grant funding. So we take a look at 2018, you look, a year and a half later, and we flatlined. We flatlined. No grant funding. Grant funding makes a difference. Once we get the grant funding was awarded at the end of 2019. So you can see that's starting to creep up again. The maps that I used for this actually reflect, I think that's from April of 2020. So it's not kind of up to date. Hopefully, rumor has it that we'll be seeing some updates in the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we'll see some increases there. But on a high level, I wanted to make sure to say that. And I'm going to put out there, and I know she would, but I won't be able to see any questions in the chat. So Mary or Bernadine, will you let me know if there are any questions? People are welcome to ask anytime. Before I look at the counties, to some degree, counties are imaginary lines. I use counties because that's the way that I can get the information. I want that kind of consistent information across the state. The truth of the matter is we're going for ubiquitous coverage. So it shouldn't make much of a difference, but it does. You have different providers that cross different counties or don't cross an entire county. So this is just what I've been able to select. To kind of morph on what Bernadine has often said, if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. Each county has a different challenge in terms of who the providers are, what the terrain is, what the population density is. There are a number of different factors. But as we work with this, I think you do start to recognize some scenarios. You recognize some of the winning factors. And I kind of figured out how I would present this information by listening to Diane Wells from the Office of Broadband Development show us the interactive map last week. And it was fascinating to see her say, okay, so this is your address. And because she, in that role, and hopefully in this role, she's a little bit like a nurse at the triage. Okay, so you've got this, so that's probably not the, you're conscious, So that's not the problem. You're standing up, so that's not the problem. You're, this, that, and the other. You kind of pick what you think are the scenarios. So it's a little bit science, it's a little bit art. And that's kind of how I get, again, to that red, green, yellow standing for the counties. I'll start with the green counties, and I'll just, these are the green counties. Congratulations to Rock County, Ramsey. You can read the whole list. The factors that seem to be prevalent in this, and I started this work by doing a flow chart. I did all the profiles, and then I looked at it because I really wanted this to be as much descriptive as prescriptive. Once I looked at that and I looked at this, and I said, well, my first guess would be that if you're a metro county, you make the business case. If you're in Ramsey County or Hennepin County, you're probably in good shape with very little effort. There are some counties, Dakota's on the list now. Dakota wasn't on the list a couple of years ago, although they've been extremely, extremely active, but they were very active on the government network and then started to look at access for residents. So if you're a mixed metro, suburban, rural county, you'll have to do more efforts. But if you're a metro county, that's a great characteristic to have. You're kind of born on third, if that's the case. If you've got a co-op in your area, and again, these are not definitive, but once I took out the metro counties, the next thing I realized is that a lot of those counties had co-ops. If you go down the list, it's Black Apparel, anybody in Paul Bunyan and CTC area, we all know, and Minnesota is generous of cooperatives. And that's a big help. If you're in a county with a cooperative, you're probably sitting in pretty good shape because they take care of their shareholders, they take care of their stakeholders, their community. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up, you might be sitting there knowing that you're in a red county. Sometimes you can get a cooperative to move to your area, to not move their offices, but extend the broadband to their areas. So and once you've got a model, I think Black Pearl County in Western Minnesota, they got the ARA funding back in, I'm going to say 2010, but it might have been 2012. And they worked with farmers or federated to get fiber to the home to most of that county back in that day. And that is a model that then has been followed by Swift. At Rock County uses a different co-op, but they, all those folks in that area, they found a model that seems to work for them. So as I go through this, I think it's a little bit of taking a look at the counties that are kind of like you or similar for one reason or another and seeing what's worked for them. And is that a scenario that you'll be able to do? So once I took out the metro counties and the co-ops, there was just one county left, and I believe it was Lake County. And the way that Lake County made up the difference was by grants. They got big grants. Again, the ARA grants back in 2010, 2012, around that time. So those are some of the factors, some of the characteristics that I found prevalent with the green counties. Next, we'll look at the red counties. And these are the counties that, that need to really start looking at what's up. And when I say need to start really looking at, that is not to indicate that these counties have not been looking at it, not at all. They've just been dealt a different hand. Very often, there might be a national provider monopoly in the area. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide. For some folks, they're just aiming too low. And by they, I don't mean the county themselves, but either the provider is aiming too low or the county is aiming too low. And I'll look at some of those examples. I know we've had many discussions about it, and Bill Coleman wrote a great report on a couple of years ago about the CAF funding, and providers, CenturyLink, Windstream, and Frontier in Minnesota got federal funding, but they only needed to build to 25.3 and really only to 10.1 in some places. So it expanded broadband, it didn't upgrade it. And what so many of these communities need, they need more than the expansion of existing, which now some of those connections don't even qualify for what we define as broadband. They need the upgrade. And then we'll take a look at least one county where they're settling for too less. In some areas it's too expensive. We've got a number of people who've, especially recently, have done feasibility studies, and they're finding out it's just really super expensive. So the solution there might be to look at some hybrid solutions. And then there are counties that they're just off my radar anyways. They don't seem to be moving in any direction towards that. People, I assume when you're looking at this, you're looking at your own county, you know, or the county of your football rivalry, you know. So I assume people have had enough time, and I will put these PowerPoints on the Blended on Broadband blog as soon as I'm done, and we'll have all this archived up there, as I said, by dinner time. One thing I want to note about competition, this is a map that I really looked at last year when I did the county profiles, and the map may have changed slightly, but the information I think remains the same. This takes a look at providers, and it's I can't remember who did the map, but it was a national map that I asked them to kind of give us a state look at. Counties or areas, and the nice thing about this, you can see where this is not done by county, and here you can see where they're, you know, counties are kind of imaginary, but areas that have blue only, they have top 6 providers. So they have national providers, and they only have 1. Where there's a light blue area, those residents have access to 1 national provider, and that's it. Hence the monopoly. In those areas, I mean, if people who know the map well will know that East Central Minnesota, we find them more often on the red and yellow list than we do on the green list, because they're having to deal with that. And we'll take a look at some counties that have found ways around that. But that's, you weren't born on third base if you're in that area. Where there's light green, there's 1 provider, but it's not a national provider, which generally means it's a co-op or it's a local provider. And those are the areas that, despite not being in a metro area, seem to be doing better. It's not there are plenty of places where they're served by 1 co-op, and they may or may not have good access, but a lot of places do. This is just scenario building. The orange areas have a wide array of providers. So they have competition, which is kind of in broadband world, they're nirvana. So I'll provide this link here. You can find the providers for your county in this link. I will provide that in the notes too. Now for
Ann?
Yeah.
When you get to these slides, can you maybe put it in presentation mode, because people can't read them?
Oh, sure.
A little too small.
Sure. Thank you for that.
And then Whitney posted a question in the chat box about Lake County and the accuracy perhaps of those maps. And you want to say a word about maybe the accuracy of maps quickly?
Sure. Yes, the accuracy of maps. The map, I think I did one blog post saying, lies, damn lies, and maps. People know when they're on the front lines of those maps. The maps that, and I think the Minnesota maps are as good as you get. Can get. They get the information from the providers, from federal farms, from the providers, and they kind of extrapolate from there, which often will mean if one household is served in a census tract, it'll say that that whole area is served. I think the Office of Broadband Development does a nice job. If they get complaints from people, they'll go and they'll test on site. They'll do field testing for that. But the maps are they're reflective. They're not precise, or not always as accurate. And I will briefly say there is an effort through the Minnesota Broadband Coalition and Geo Partners to build better maps. And maybe somebody can provide a link to that. I don't remember if I do that later slide, but we're trying to get people on the front lines to take the speed test. And that will give us a better view of what's actually happening in these areas. Is that helpful, Whitney? I can see you, so you cannot.
Yes, and I've been using the state maps and the speed test data and zooming in on certain areas, and it's been very enlightening and very helpful. So I really recommend people look at the state maps and then zoom in on that speed test data, and it will it'll create more questions.
But it'll be so nice to have that to do with, because otherwise it's kind of the same data that's used for all of these maps, and I'll say this and then I'll move on. This is where you need a critical mass. We need everybody to take those tests, because if it's, if you only have 20% of the state taking the test, well, you better hope they're widely dispersed. The map is only going to be as good as the data in both cases. So I think I answered the question. Stop me again if I didn't. Lake. I'm going to leave Lake County hanging. Ask me again if that counts, because that is if you spend your time looking at broadband all the time, Lake County was like a soap opera. So exciting! I had something to talk about at dinner parties, But we'll leave that if we get that. So here are the yellow counties, and this is where I'll be fair, it's a little capricious. I kind of take a look at, and it's not a grade. It's not a grade. It's not saying that you're only doing yellow work. It just means this is an area where it's more difficult for one reason or another. It just is going to require more attention. It's from the world of distance education. It's a lot more like the first time the teacher sends you an email about your kids' homework, just saying that this is something you want to look at. There are a lot of communities that are working, but there are barriers that we just mentioned when we were looking at the red counties. There is a national provider. The population density is 2.6. There's areas that are just really hard to come by. There are some counties where the percentage is pretty good, but they've just been stalled for too long. Maybe they've had, they've been at 80% for 5 years, and there's no growth upwards. So that's a community that has to stay. They're not feeling the pain right now. They're not enough people to dedicate the attention to it. I think COVID has changed that. Suddenly there's a greater need for it. There's a need for greater broadband, and there's a greater need for broadband, so and for some counties, they're just kind of getting going again. I think, I'm trying to remember if Lesueur is on this list, but God love you, Lesueur. You're yellow, you're not red, because you've been, a couple of years ago, there was a summit, a broadband summit, and that kind of ignited a fire under a lot of people in that community. So there are different ways to try to do that. Good, that worked. I was a little afraid I would cut myself out there, because the intention for this slide, now what we'll do is I'm just going to take a look at a couple of different counties, and what I look at when I decide whether it's red, yellow, or green. And it's not so much that I'm the word of God or anything like that, but it's a little bit like if you were a triage nurse, these are the things you want to look at. These might help you self-diagnose what your problems might be. And I think I will make this bigger still, but I don't think that you can read the stuff on the right here. But it's mostly kind of the table that I want to look at, and I've got it. There we go. Here's a county, Mille Lacs, that's been very active. There are two things that I see when I'm looking at the broadband access over the years. One, they're still at 60% access to the goals, the 120 goals. The thing that makes me frustrated, the thing that gets me a little crazy right here, is they went from 47% access to 25.3 and 120. Somewhere along the lines, somebody got funding, somebody decided to invest in broadband that only brought them to 25.3. It only brought them to 25.3. There's not much of a chance they're going to get that to 100% by next year, but 87% that's not the worst. The problem is they're not making any further with that 120 goal. And we can pretend like that 120 goal doesn't mean anything. But again, especially in the year of COVID, we're understanding that that's the difference between being able to have 2 parents work from home and 2 kids go to school at home. One thing that COVID did is it accelerated the appreciation and the need for broadband. I think that we probably would have been there a few years down the line anyways, at some point, more certainly for snow days. The expectation would have been that everyone would have been in line, but this just, this shot us straight ahead with something of that. So they're been very active. What is nice is they have dedicated some CARES funding, and they get almost $1 million in the 2019 grants cycle that I'm sure was not reflected in the last map. So so that is things that I think will help them. But as I said, it's mostly just how do we take a look at something like this? This is my frustration here is somebody has made some investment and they haven't been aiming high enough. Here's Pipestone. And here's the problem. Sometimes it's just one factor. And I suppose you can all probably read this, but CenturyLink installed a bunch of fiber nodes and they will be offering service at 110. Now, hopefully there's a way for them to switch that to increase that. But sometimes, usually a provider will come in and kind of will make the decision for the community. And I don't have an answer. Well, the only answer I have on that will come up here in a second, but it's sometimes it's just one factor and you got to figure out how can we deal with that factor. To be fair, when I look at the speeds, the speed for 120 and the speeds to 25.3 are about the same right now. So that's good. At least the service that they have is good. They don't have a lot of people in that middle land.
Hey, Ann, a few more comments have popped up if you want to take a peek. When are the next set of maps going to come out? Do you know?
They're going to do an update, and Diane, you correct me if I'm wrong. There's an update which usually isn't as big of a deal in the next couple of weeks, and then usually the maps come out around April, don't they? And again, Diane, feel free. And I have to do a lot of finagling to be able to see. Because I'm sharing my screen, Mary, I've got a lot of finagling to see the chat. Sorry, if you just read it, that will save me.
No, I understand. And then, so Vince had asked about the maps and then, just made a comment that counties can go from red to green in a hurry. They're very hopeful for Lincoln County.
Yeah.
Diane commented that 25.3 increase is likely to, or I think she's talking about your last slide. She's saying that, that's probably due to CAF.
Yeah.
That increase.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there was just a comment about how upload speed is the key to productivity. And
Yes,
I'm going to invite people to unmute and just ask their question.
Yeah.
I think Ann likes that. So
I do.
Yeah.
that would be great. So I said, when I'm sharing my screen, I can't see those. So that's, please do.
But I will jump in and say Diane is saying that the interactive map should be updated next week with minor updates. The next major data collection is early 2021 with the maps available in mid-April.
Just nothing sounds better to me right now than 2021. With that, I'm going to go back on to, I really wanted to pull out Chisago. But here's the funny thing is some of these examples that I've used are a little bit, we're a little bit random, but kind of exemplified what I wanted to do. But Chisago County has done a good job with many things, and our friend Nancy Hoffman over there, but they have had 2 broadband grants awarded to CenturyLink where they've really worked with the community. They've really worked with the community, and that CenturyLink had the CAF funding. And again, the CAF funding is the federal funding, but it doesn't, it kind of requires you to build to 25.3. There, if you dig down, it can also be to 10.1, but to 25.3. Chisago County didn't want access to 25.3. They wanted the better access. So to be fair, they talked to CenturyLink and they talked to Frontier, both serve that county. CenturyLink is the one who said, well, tell us more. So the county said they would put in some money. They went for the grant and then the CAF funding. And with that, oh God, I always I got to look for the towns because I morphed the word, it's Sunshine Township and Fish Lake, and I know I just massacred both of those town names, but they have been able to leverage the state grants to push the federal grants to a higher minimum speeds. So that, and I think those have gone quite well. I was in some of the rooms, some very, very hot rooms in Chisago County late at night, no air conditioning in the middle of the summer, where they were talking about, and once they did, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but they decided to increase tax to the people who got, we're going to get the better service. And when they did the math, the amount that they were going to increase the tax was much lower than their prices were differential were going to be once they got fiber and the convenience costs. So if you have a national provider looking to see what Chisago has done, there's my tip. There's my tip. So that they just have done a good job with that. I wanted to point that out.
Hey, Anne,
Yeah.
is there any newer examples of that? Because I'm starting to feel like the Chisago County example, I'd like to see or have another one to reference.
Well, right, because they've had two grant, two different years there, or they've had two grants there. Maybe somebody else can chime up with one of them. We didn't have the grants for a year, and then there were the funding last year. I don't know of one, but there might be. It looks like Bill might have an answer.
I think the window for that kind of collaboration with CenturyLink and Frontier is closed because that CAF $2 are kind of all spent, almost all. And so that that was a nice timing thing for Chisago County to take advantage of that CAF 2 planning, and then the state money, that's kind of gone now. But now the question will be with the RDOF dollars, it'll be the same kind of opportunity to meld federal dollars with state dollars. And Diane I'm sure they have a lot of conversations about that in their team right now.
And we never.
Yeah, this is Diane. I will say Nestle Township, and the funding is coming from the townships in Sunrise Township, Fish Lake Township, and Nestle Township. And to CenturyLink's credit, they had already completed their CAF 2 build in Nestle Township. So they went back in. Based on what I'm seeing on our maps, we saw reported addresses to the FCC that CAF 2 was done in Nestle. So that was not their CAF $2 there. They'd already done their build in Nestle when they agreed to do the fiber to the home project in an application that was approved in 2019.
Oh, good. Thanks, Diane.
So you're saying there's a chance, to quote from Dumb and Dumber.
Yes, I think you should keep the line of communication open.
Yeah. Well, and who knows what kind of federal funding will come as a result of COVID. We've got the CARES now, but we just don't know what's coming in the future.
Yes. We have had communities with the funding at the township and county levels that were ready to go with a project, get funding, and are building before this year yet. Linwood Township in Anoka County, I think it is, was ready to go. They were going to each pay $1,100 per address in a neighbor, 200 and some homes in a neighborhood. They had agreed to do that. And then CARES Act funding came, and it's going to be built, and CARES Act funding is paying for it now. Linwood Township residents are not.
Luck favors the prepared. Nice job. So knowing that, I think just the idea of knowing that you can talk to some of these providers and come to them with part of a solution is, I'm doing this for my own. Okay. I think Travis is another one where I've got to remind myself why the heck this is one where the population density in Travis, I think, is 2.6. Yeah. So it's hard to make a business case when that's the hand that you've been dealt. So here you can see they made a deal with a wireless provider in 2018, but those speeds are not going to meet 120. So they're what do you do? That is the hard thing about it. And there was another presentation just the other day, do you get people what they need today, especially, as I said, given all of the COVID stuff and having to work from home and go to school from home, or do you plan for the future? But be cognizant of that decision that you're making. It's if they're doing a solution where they're getting wireless in the short term, it's the potential for a hybrid. If they're getting fiber to the towers or whatever, that's at least building somewhat to the future. But it's just a warning to know if you're coming up with a plan that's going to expand and not upgrade, just be aware of that. And look at some of the other counties that have done. Sherburne County, here's another one. And Sherburne County is one where they, you know, you look at their numbers, they're at 73% access to 120. I talked to with I half a dozen counties about COVID, and I'll expand on that in a minute. But they were saying, you know, so much of Sherburne County just naturally got the service that they needed because there was a business case to be made there. But then when they stopped, and they've been working on this for a long time, they realized that those areas outside of the towns, and that's a very popular scenario to be in. You know, the towns are well covered, but you get outside a mile, you get outside 2 miles, and they're not covered as well. So a group like Sherburne, and when I look to say, oh, you know, are they stuck, or are they on an upward momentum? They were quick when I talked to them to say they're definitely on the upward momentum in terms of renewed interest and renewed passion in this since COVID. You know, they're experiencing where they've got, as they said, some areas that are served, so they're underserved, so they're unserved. You know, and how do you run a school system when you've got to do distance education and you've got such a mixed bag? So as I said, I think that's the last county that I've looked at. It's helpful to use kind of those strategies, see where your growth has been. Are you getting faster? Are you stagnating? You know, where are you staying there? Who are the providers in your area? Are there a way that you can talk to other providers? Are there counties that you know just, you know that they're geographically similar to you, economically they're similar to you, or population density wise, they're similar to you? What have they tried, and is it working or is it not working? I want to, because it is such an unusual year. In January, I had high hopes to go visit a lot of different counties and just to kind of do kind of a focus group on what's happening in different counties. And you know, March 19th, that changed. And we decided there was just one question of interest, and there will be one question of interest when we look back in 25 years from now. Was broadband a help or a hindrance in dealing with COVID? Which otherwise phrased as, did you have enough broadband to help you? And I don't want to, you know, in deference to time, I won't go too much detail here, but I've kind of have in order from Rock County, they were like, yeah, no problem. But they just, you know, nobody loves the pandemic. Let's be really clear there. But they were able to shift school and work to online seamlessly. I remember Kyle saying, well, now they do all of the county commission meetings, and all the local government meetings are all done online now. And attendance is up. He didn't say whether that was a pro or a con, but attendance is up. You know, civic engagement is up. They just were able to move everything, and it was so easy. Kind of the same in Lac La Perouse County. One of the things that they noted in Lac La Perouse County, and I talked to Pam Lehman there, is that having the fast broadband meant that they were in better position to apply for some of the federal funding that was coming to local businesses. So they just felt that right away. And Lac La Perouse has had, you know, fiber to the home to most of the county for a couple of years now. And as you go down the list, you run into some counties where it's more of a mixed bag. And then again, what do you do in the schools? With Rock County, they had a couple kids that didn't have broadband at home. Well, that was generally an affordability issue and a device issue. So it was easy to work with the provider and make it affordable. And then we've seen that, and the providers have been awesome through COVID, saying we'll make sure that you can get the access that affordability won't be the issue. The issue is if you just can't get it to the house. You know, and some of these counties not only were having to deal with, there was no wired connection, but the other solution often was, okay, so we need to make it affordable. We need to get you a device. And most school districts were really good about trying to do that. If you don't have access at home, we're going to give you a mobile hotspot, and that will, well, some of these counties, the mobile hotspots don't work. You know, so that's where you really need to take a look. I mean, it's a huge difference. And I live in St. Paul, and I see the kids in the Catholic school walking home from school every day. And to be fair, my kids went to the same Catholic school, But the kids in the public school, where I have kids now, they don't go to school in person. You know, that's going to be a difference for them, whether you're going to school in person or whether you're not. And it's kind of the same with whether you're going to, I'm preaching to the choir here, you know, if you don't have access at your house, your kids are going to be in trouble. If you don't have access ubiquitous throughout your school district, you're having to make different decisions. So I could talk about this for a long time. I will say Le Sueur got, they, again, working so hard and really making strides forward, but we met on during a thunderstorm, and sometimes one person would have to get off the call so the next person could talk because they knew they were using the same tower connection. How is this useful? As I said, for policymakers, I think recognizing the impact of the speed goals and the grants. I think for community leaders, kind of looking at how your community is doing, and then find somebody to compare yourself to. To help, I wanted to add the 9 most improved county by ranking. These are the folks, and they're not necessarily, they haven't all moved into, you know, from yellow to green or red to yellow. It may just be moved within that strata. But these are folks who have seen a great increase since the last county profile, which was about a year ago. So there's your homework. Take a look at your own profile. And then take a look at some of these most improved if you need to get some ideas. So with that, I'm going to change things. I'm going to stop sharing the screen so that I can see the chat. And see if there are any questions. So you can get to the profiles from the Planted on Broadband blog and from the Bland Foundation website. There's a nice map. I will say there's a nice map, and there are some interactive tools that you can use on the Bland Foundation site, which are slick and they're great. It's the Blanded on Broadband blog is probably easier to search, but each links to the other. So if you search on one and get to the other tool, that's.
Thank you, Ann, so much for presenting all that data to us this morning. Are there any questions or comments from the group to Ann before we move on?
And now is when I feel we need Kairos.
Right, I know, it's been a lot, but this is a chance for people to just kind of react to what we heard. Any feedback?
And this is Eileen Smith. Can I jump in quick? In your conversations with counties and with people, has reliability come up as an issue? I mean, I'm in Hennepin County and have great service speed wise, but reliability wise, I might as well not have anything.
Yeah. And when you don't have reliability, you know, it's like having a car that you're not sure is going to work every morning.
Yeah.
You know, you still make plans differently. And certainly that was the case. And a lot of people who thought that their broadband at home was just fine until suddenly, again, everybody had to use it. You know, talked to one group where the one parent was a teacher and then they had a couple in school. So the teacher, God love her, is working in the middle of the night to get everything ready for her students, because then one kid can use the internet, you know, from 9 to 11, and the next one uses it from 11 to 1, and the next one, because you just can't have 3 or 4 people at a time. And then sometimes it would go down. So, I mean, you know, when you're pushed on that kind of a thread anyways, just, you know, that binder snaps and it implodes. So it's that lack of reliability is a big one. Oh, thank you, Mary, for putting the links to the profiles in the chat too.
Great. Well, hey, thank you again, Ann. It was wonderful to get to walk through this together as a team, all of us, to see all that hard work. And again, I just really appreciate all the hard thinking you did. And it was really fun to see all the, for me, the value I took from it was the factors that influence, and is a lot to think about. And it really is, you've seen one county, isn't it? So yeah. Well, group, we are what I'm going to suggest that we do now is, before we close the conference for good, that we would take one more chance to meet in small groups to just share any reflections we have about the conference. I thought this would be a chance for people with one another to maybe talk about together their best idea or suggestion or what they're going to be taking with them going forward. Before we disperse, why don't let's do that. Let's just meet up again. Mary's going to put us in small groups and we'll take, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes just to reflect with one another about what we've heard and some key takeaways. And then after that, we'll just come back together for just a brief minute and say goodbye. So with that, Mary will get us going here and we'll have to join in and we'll just, share some reflections. Just feels too weird to just say goodbye without a chance to connect one more time in our group. So that's what we'll take a few minutes to do here.
And I'm assigning people manually just so I get a somewhat, just to get us a little bit of a balance here. Make sure that not all the planners are in one room. Okay, so here we go. I'm opening up 3 different rooms. Oh, just for 10 minutes maybe?
Yeah.
Okay, it was set for 28, that would not do. Okay, here you go. Michael, if you're still with us, there's probably a button that popped up that said join room, or if it didn't pop up for you, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen, there might be a breakout room tab. There you go. All right, guys. Oh, pausing the recording.